sorting out the slides and essentially for having us. And thank you guys for coming online on a Monday night to talk about electricity systems, which is actually what I think is a very exciting topic. And I probably sound like a bit of a nerd when I say it, but it's because of so many reasons, and the way that CELSI is a bit of a grassroots community-led initiative, which I think makes it a very exciting prospect. So do we have the slides online? I don't know if I can see them online right now.
Actually, Simon or Pierre, would you mind, sorry, one second, Simon or Pierre, would you mind enabling the screen sharing? I just realized it's not. If you just make me, if you just enable me.
So we'll let them sort out the slides in a moment. There's always a bit of technical difficulty when we go on Zoom. But I'm sure by the end of the year, we'll all have caught on to Zoom and be experts in it. So what I wanted to do today was really to give you an idea about what CELSI does, who we are, where we've come from, and how we think our business model has the opportunity to decarbonize communities in a way that is both environmentally sustainable, but also economically sustainable. Our whole concept is about making sure that environmental sustainability is completely intertwined with social sustainability and social development as well. So there we go. These slides have started to come online. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Simon.
Okay, just to sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, you can see all that, can you?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, fine. And you can hear me as well, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
If you just go
sorry to interrupt.
screen,
on you go. Yeah. Yep. How's that?
Lovely. Perfect. That's
there
wonderful.
We are. Right.
So as I mentioned, South East London Community Energy is a grassroots-led initiative that came together from a number of both Greenwich and Lewisham residents. And we do serve both boroughs, and we also cover a few areas outside of those boroughs, but main focus is in South East London. So if you can just go on to the next slide, please, Simon. So essentially what I wanted to cover in a pretty basic sense today is who we are and what we do, how the model works, and it is what we call a community energy business model. And it's something that is quite special because it's a social business. Not only does it give back to the community, but it's also meant to generate profit and be a sustainable way of developing the economy. And then I'll have a quick look at what challenges and what opportunities we are coming across in terms of how the renewable energy market grows and develops, how people view energy, but also what the government are doing to support or to drive the initiative forwards in a sense, and what we've kind of had to deal with on the way. And then I will touch slightly on the wider context of community energy, but I will pass on to David, who has a great grasp of the wider energy system, which he will lead you on to, because community energy is a very small part of that wider, bigger picture kind of image. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Simon. Thank you. So South East London Community Energy was, as I mentioned, developed by a group of local residents, and they all shared one vision. And that vision was to create a low carbon future where everyone has access to affordable energy that meets their needs, and everyone has a voice in how that's produced. We were formed about 6 years ago now, in 2014. We've now got around 14 solar sites across Greenwich and Lewisham. Over 7,000 volunteering hours have gone into our work, and we've had volunteers from all different backgrounds and interests, which makes it a really exciting, diverse group of people that you can actually learn from if you're engaged in the work that we do. And one of the core areas of focus for us is making sure that our energy transition is just, and it brings along the people that are stuck in fuel poverty, because it is a crazy high number across Southeast London. Southeast London is actually one of the worst places in Europe for fuel poverty. And considering how developed London is meant to be, it's just horrendous to think that there's such a big gap between the people doing so well and the people that are left behind. So that is something that we really try to tackle. Last winter, we managed to give advice to around 280 residents, completely free energy advice. We've held workshops, around 35 workshops just last winter, to train people on how they can gain more knowledge about energy saving tips and how they can support other people who are in fuel poverty as well. And we also held training sessions for frontline workers who are dealing with people who have fuel poverty issues or are in debt on a day-to-day basis. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So at the core of our organisation is really solar PV. And it's one of the best technologies because it has become a lot cheaper than it was when it started out. It's something that can be deployed relatively easily, although there are kind of challenges, of course, with any projects, as you could imagine on any project. But solar the costs have been coming down and down and down, and they've been coming down a lot more rapidly than people expected them to. So that's our primary technology. And we work with schools, community hubs, and leisure centres, churches, places like that, to put solar panels on their roofs. And what kind of benefit does it offer? Well, they get lower electricity costs. That's because we're able to sell the electricity at a price that's lower than what the energy suppliers offer them, often because the energy suppliers that they're going to partly aren't very competitive, but also just because we're able to cut out a lot of the costs that are involved in retailing electricity, basically. It provides a practical learning tool for the schools, for the students. It also gets people engaged about renewable energy, especially in our schools. We see parents coming to ask more and more about how they can get solar on their homes, and just having it in front of you, it really is a practical reminder about what you can do yourself to green how you live. So a lot of this solar has come through projects that have received certain subsidies or certain funding from the government. And one of the recent projects that we're working on is from a grant fund called the Lewisham Community Energy Fund, which was set up quite recently. And it's something that we're seeing more and more local councils set up because we've had so much interest in the climate emergency. That is very much down to people like XR raising the awareness about this issue. So you have gotten through, you have had positive outcomes, and it is making projects like ours go ahead. There are further issues with the subsidies, but I'll get onto that a little bit later. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Simon. Thank you. So the second part of our work, as I mentioned, is the fuel poverty alleviation work. Essentially, what we try to do when we develop our fuel poverty work is we try to make sure that we're not just engaging with the people that are relatively easy to reach, not the people that are necessarily constantly able and willing to reach out for help. But because we're such a grassroots-led organisation, we thankfully have access to a lot of groups that the normal organisations who offer this kind of advice wouldn't have access to. So we've started developing projects around those that are hard to reach. Two of those that have been really successful are, one of them is called the Empowering Elders Project. And what that does is it essentially teaches older people and train them on how to give energy advice, and then they go on and give that to the other people within their community, who are often elderly people that don't tend to leave their homes too much, are quite unsure of how to deal with suppliers, and are quite scared by suppliers for very valid reasons quite often. So it's making sure that people are using the links that they have and using that community that they've already developed, that network, to go out and support other people. Parent Power is another one of those projects, which is where we taught some of the parents in our schools on how to give energy advice. And again, they've been able to go out and reach out to the people that wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable or be able to go and ask for that advice themselves, because there is quite a strong stigma around not being able to pay your bills, being in debt, having your electricity cut off sometimes if you're on a prepayment meter and things like that. It can be quite embarrassing. It can be quite stigmatizing. But by doing it through community networks that exist, it makes it a lot easier, because it's someone that you trust, it's someone that you know, and it's someone that you're happy to engage with. So, as I mentioned, the community partners that we work with are key for this work. Charlton Athletic Community Trust, the football club's community trust, have actually supported us to develop a lot of the work that we've done and pay for some of this work as well. There's another project that we have developed around funding, which is called eco funding, or energy company obligation funding. So this is funding that electricity suppliers or utilities like, British Gas have to give out, because they are, I believe it's because they are paying back certain fines on their pollution. But don't quote me on that one. It's essentially funding that energy suppliers would have had to give out anyway, but we can support people to access things that improve the efficiency of their homes, help them use less energy, and just make their homes warmer and a lot healthier to live in than they would have been able to do before. And again, developing training programs around this is a really positive aspect of our work, because it just helps us reach so many more people. The kind of stories that you hear from people that have been living in fuel poverty are very they're very touching. It's things that you wouldn't ever expect to hear about people that live in London, and people that are our neighbours, people that are in our local community, genuinely getting extremely cold because they can't heat their homes, or they're worried they don't have enough money to heat their homes and they don't want to get back into debt. People that have illnesses and need to have their homes to a higher temperature, but are actually making their illnesses worse because of that lack of support, that lack of insulation. And the housing stock in the UK is probably one of the worst in Europe for keeping heat inside your home and actually creating a warm and healthy living environment for people without using huge amounts of gas to heat it up through central heating. So that's really the core of our fuel poverty work and why we do it. So if we can go on to the next slide, sorry, Simon. How is it that this model works? Well, it's a neat little model, and it's not something that we have developed. They are already doing and already implementing. So it starts off with a community share offer, and that's where we fundraise solar panels on local buildings. So these are all individuals, and they may be local, but they may not be local, who want to essentially do good with their money. They want to invest, they want to get to do it in a way that supports the environment and supports the local community. So they'll invest in us through bonds, shares, and often those are tax-free bonds and shares, but and it is an at-risk investment, but often pay interest back on that does make it a viable investment and worth looking into. So we take that money, we install it, we use it to install solar panels on local buildings like the schools that we're working with, like the leisure centres, like the churches that run events in our local community. And then those buildings use the energy on site, and anything extra goes straight back into the grid. So we've got two kind of...
The couple of minutes more, if you can.
Wonderful.
Finish what you've got to say.
Yes.
You've got to tell us. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you. So the two main income streams that we get are, or we used to get, one of them is the feed-in tariff, which some of you, if you work in renewable energy, will have heard of. And that was a subsidy that came from the government for every bit of electricity that you generate from renewable energy. And also another payment for every bit of electricity that you put back into the grid from renewable energy. We also get income from these sites buying the electricity from us. Again, more often than not, actually in most cases, we've been able to cut the site's electricity costs by a significant amount. So the sites save money as well. And then what do we do with that income? Well, it goes to maintain the panels. It goes into creating a community fund, which we use for our fuel poverty work. And it also goes back to repaying our social investors a return on their investment. And those repayments have been around between kind of 3 and 5% at Celsi every year. So if you just go on to the next slide, Simon. Thank you. So what are some of the challenges and the opportunities that we are facing at the moment? The feed-in tariff was the first thing I mentioned, because that's such a significant revenue stream for us, and it's something that we really rely on to get our sites together and to make them economically feasible. And sadly, that was actually scrapped for community groups in March this year, but we did manage to get our most recent sites finished before March. So they do receive the feed-in tariff, but future sites won't receive that government subsidy anymore. And it was not replaced with a subsidy at all. It was replaced with a little bit of a scheme that does help you sell your power back to the grid, but it's nothing like the feed-in tariff, and there's quite a gap in what the government have now put forward for commercial solar panels. There also, there's some funding which I mentioned called the eco funding, or the energy company obligation funding, which again is becoming tougher and tougher to apply for every year. The kind of eligibility criteria gets tougher and tougher every year. So our job is getting harder, I think it's fair to say, in some respects, despite there being a lot more interest. So we're kind of having to be agile and reactive. In 2020, we launched the COVID-19 online energy advice because we couldn't do our advice in our energy cafes anymore, which has worked really well. We've extended that throughout the summer. Usually we only do it in winters, but we were seeing a lot more people in fuel poverty because they'd lost their jobs or because of lower income. We've diversified our services, so we're not just working on solar, we're also working on insulating homes and buildings, we're working on LED lighting, and we're kind of strengthening and growing our partnerships within the community as well to help us get a further reach. So it's great to be able to speak to you guys at XR about this as well.
Can can you sum up and bring it to an end, please, Nadia?
Yes, sorry, last slide.
Oops. Oops. Oh dear. Where have we gone? There it is.
That's the
There we
one.
are.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we are just one of so many groups around the UK. So there are about 300 community energy organisations. There will be one close to you. We're the one for Greenwich and Lewisham. There's one in Southwark. There's one in kind of Wandsworth. They're everywhere. But all of these different groups make up a big UK community energy scene who we all learn from, we all grow from, and it is it's a very helpful way to share information which you wouldn't see with commercial businesses, and learning from other groups has really helped us grow a lot faster. So if you just go on to the last slide, please, Simon. Oh,
that's all I've got.
Never mind, that's it. So I just had my contact details on there, but you can visit our website, selce.org.uk, to find out more, or tweet at us or send us a Facebook message at selon, so South East London, com energy. And yeah, get in touch with me if you're interested to find out more. But thank you so much. And I will now pass on back to Simon and to David to kind of give us a bigger context picture of how the electricity system can be decarbonised.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nadia, and thanks for bearing with us with all our confusion pressing buttons. Just a quick so Nadia, you mentioned the contact details for CELSE at the end. If you can find the chat thing, and you can type them in there at some point in the next hour, then people can also pick them up from there and make sure that they know how to get in touch with you. Okay, so we're going to move on to David, but I must ask again, our technical people, is somebody set to do David's slides, or shall I do them? Silence.
Sorry, Simon, I can't do it, I'm afraid.
Okay, right. Okay, I'm your backup, David, and I'll share the slides. And David is it's hard to introduce him because his CV is so long and impressive. And David, I think it's fair to say, set up the Public Services International Research Unit at the University of Greenwich sometime, I think about 15 years ago, and led that group of researchers for many years, looking at the energy, the water, and the other systems, not only here in the UK, but actually across Europe, and what their relationship was with the state. Obviously, they felt very, very strongly about privatization. That's something they campaigned on a lot. And I know that David advised the Labour Party on its policy, which was to bring a measure of public ownership back into electricity. He's been on this beat a long time, and so over to you, David, and I will try to find your slides and share them with everybody.
Terrific. Well, Simon, thanks very much. Another bit of my CV that you missed off is that I've known you for some years as well, and been very stimulated by the exchanges we've had over the years as in response to a changing world. And also great appreciation of what Nadia's been saying about what's happening in Greenwich. What I'm going to do is going to be a kind of a whistle-stop tour from Yorkshire to Munich via Hollywood, but it's based very much on the political force that's been generated by local initiatives such as CELSE and by the political potential of initiatives such as CELSE. And I'll talk about that from pretty much the next slide. Simon, can we move? You'll see here I say that the presentation is based on joint work with Mika Minio Paluelo, who some of you may know or come across. basically we worked together for a couple of years producing background papers for the Labour Party on energy policy, and most of what I'm going to present to you comes from those jointly authored papers. Simon, can we have the next slide? Okay, simple reason, looking at the issue of public ownership. Why should we bother with public ownership of the energy system? The food system isn't in public ownership and there's no particular proposals for it. Why should we do it in terms of energy? And I put it under four real main headings here, of which the first one is, in my view, democratic control and planning and localization. That's always been true of the energy system, that it's such an important part of economy and society that it requires constant planning and replanning, and democratizing that planning is one of the most powerful and important gains we can make to ensure that the system develops in a way that serves us rather than simply the interests of people and corporations with capital. Second is the economic gains, and I emphasize this second. I'm not going to show many slides on it, but I emphasize this second because a lot of people have this basic assumption, well, public ownership's a nice idea, but really the private sector is more efficient, isn't it? To which I have two simple points. One is that I've read hundreds of articles by economists, most of whom believe in the supremacy of the private sector on the question of comparative efficiency. And all those articles overall across all sectors come up with the general result that there is no significant difference in operating efficiencies. Very important thing to hang on to when people tell you about the need for the private sector. Second big advantage the public sector has is, surprisingly enough, capital. The cost of capital raised through the public sector is much lower than through the private sector. And Mika and I did a calculation a couple of years ago on how much less energy would cost us if the electricity and gas supply companies and grids were brought into public ownership and the money was borrowed at the near zero rates that the public sector can manage. We calculated that there would be an annual saving to the UK of about £2.5 billion per year, every year. And that works out at £100 per household every year. That's £2 a week for every household in the country, just by shifting to public finance. So these are very significant savings. There's also savings from transaction costs from having a coherent plan system. And it works as a way, it's important as a way of delivering decarbonisation. I'll say a bit more about that, give an example right at the end. And finally, it's very popular and common elsewhere. And can we go on to the next slide to just look at the popularity? Where the next slide, when it finally comes up, will show the figures from opinion polls carried out on the day of the December election. So, of course, the Labour Party lost the December 2019 election, but opinion polls on the day of the election ask a number of questions, including what's your view on public ownership of various sectors. And remarkably, there was a very, very high level of public support for public ownership across a number of sectors, and including the energy system. The answers came out almost 2-to-1 in favour of public ownership of energy. Even among Conservative voters, there was a narrow majority in favour of public ownership of energy. So this is a popular programme. Hi, Simon, are you there? And can we move these slides on by 1 or 2, if that's possible? Okay. When we do move the slides on, what it'll do is show you a picture of the taken from the Labour Party's main policy paper on energy, which showed the kind of structure that was being proposed. And to simplify the structure in verbal terms, it's very good, thanks, that's perfect. The key democratization element happens at regional level in terms of planning and responsibility. It's important with energy to have 100% universal obligation on key goals like affordability, like universal connection and access, like decarbonisation commitment to move forward with decarbonisation. And that's why the authority itself should not just be a debating chamber on policy, but an actual delivery system. And so the proposal there was that the regional agency becomes the owner and operator of the regional grids, but also develops energy generation systems to generate renewable energy and supply functions so that users can get affordable energy to deal with the issue of fuel poverty that Nadia was talking about. But building into that model was a infinite possibility of far more local community initiatives, because there are a number of initiatives around the country. Nadia listed 300, and Chelsea is one of them, where there's tremendous energy and drive in delivering various elements of the system: supply, generation, distribution. And the proposals basically included an infinite possibility for regional authorities to say, okay, any community in the country, any village, any parish, any housing block can say, we want to run our own energy generation, distribution, etc. And if the resources are put in place, if the training is put in place, if the competence is put in place, the necessary obligations on employment, etc., are fulfilled, then the regional authority would say, okay, we delegate that to you. Okay, so it's infinite possibility of local delegation. Simon, can we have the next one, please? Okay, and that's an earlier diagram, which is looks complicated, but I hope you'll have time to look at these slides afterwards. But we were looking not only at the production and operation of grids and the generation of energy, but also, very importantly, at chains of democratic control and participation and flows of information. In our views, having those public information flows going constantly up and down the system, maximizing the amount of information available, is a very important part of getting not only a democratic but an efficient system. So that was part of it. Simon, the next one, please. And the proposal didn't say that the regional politicians will end up actually being the day-to-day managers of the distribution grids or the supply companies or whatever, but that there will be an overall supervisory board. There will be professionally run companies carrying out the different responsibilities in the public sector, wholly owned by the public sector, but as professionally managed companies for distribution, supply, renewables, and district heating. So that was the idea, and I still take the view that that is the way forward that we should look to, and that we should inject those regional authorities, not only in energy, actually. I mean, this is true of health, transport, water. We desperately need democratic boards at that level. So the next slide. Okay, that shows the results on public ownership. And as I said, it's across sectors, but 53-30 on energy. Okay, the next slide. Okay, this isn't just a pipe dream or sort of an old nostalgic view of an aging lefty. Much of the energy system of many countries in Europe remains in public ownership, and at regional and local level as much as at national level. And I'll come to the example of Munich in a minute to give you a powerful, I think it's a powerful example of what can be done. So this isn't just pie in the sky pre-Thatcherite dream, this is current reality. And if we move on to the next slide, it's even a reality in the US of A. There's about 25% of the power utilities in the USA are either publicly owned or owned by co-ops. And those places include the city of Los Angeles itself, where the whole of Hollywood is lit up by publicly generated electricity. And indeed, that was very important because some of you may remember in the year 2000, introducing the market in California resulted in the system pretty much crashing permanently for about a year, except in the city of Los Angeles, which were kept out of the market. And so the lights remained on in Los Angeles as a permanent demonstration of a very good reason for maintaining public ownership and keeping the market out of it. The next slide, please, Simon. That's simply a slide of China's power generation utilities. The grid in China is, of course, publicly owned by, I think, what is now the second biggest company in the world. But so is the majority of the generation. And again, there's local government elements in there. And so the next slide, please, Simon. Okay. Oh, that's it, Munich. No, that's it, Munich. And so this is the example, and it's this is something I came across 9 years ago. And it was the opening address by the mayor of Munich, talking to a conference of economists happening in his city at a leading mainstream, not particularly radical economics institute based in Munich. And I think this is beautifully emphatic, with no wasted words, statement as to the importance of public ownership. And he simply said that today energy supply is characterized by oligopolies of private suppliers. There's practically no competition on price, and the transition to renewable energies is made rather reluctantly. By 2025, he said, our utility company, in other words, the municipally owned utility company of Munich, Stadtwerke Munich, München, aims to generate so much green energy that the entire demand of the city can be met. That's households and industry alike, including the little car firm better known as BMW. It requires enormous investments of 9 billion euros, and that can only be successful if there's a long-term goal of sustainable economic success. So he's simply laying it out as a very simple, logical project for the municipality. And in 2016, they already met the first stage of their goal, and that was Stadtwerke München was generating enough renewable energy to meet 100% of the demands of all the households in Munich, which is an extraordinary thing to have delivered so quickly. But was the result
of... Can I ask you to wind up, David, please?
I should do so. If we can move on once more to the penultimate slide.
Oops.
Yeah. No, that's it. Yep, that's it. And that in the Netherlands, they found the case of public ownership of distribution grids so compelling that it is actually illegal to have privately owned distribution grids in the Netherlands. Again, despite the Netherlands not having a particularly radical government. And just finally, the next slide, if I can squeeze it in. the efficiency point, and there's more example, boring textual stuff of this on the slides if you want to look later. And they may be useful at some stage if you want to give people some quotes as to what the reality is on comparative public-private efficiency. So for all these reasons, democratization and economic efficiency, I think there remains as strong a case for public ownership in the energy sector as ever. And it's especially important in relation to decarbonisation and continuing to try and achieve those ambitious goals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. We're now going to open it up to everybody here for discussion.